Hello. Coming up in episode 125, we'll talk about some of the keys to leadership and how we can find them by using the Wizard of Oz. Welcome to this episode of the Go Beyond Disruption podcast from the AICPA and CIMA office in the heart of the City of London. I'm Kyle Hannon. This week, follow the yellow brick road to leadership. We are speaking to the founder of LynnFountain.net, Lynn Fountain. And we're basing this conversation around a theme of a blog post that I found on her blog not too long ago called The Keys to Leadership, which we'll link to in the show notes. Lynn is a CPA, a CGMA, a CMA, and an MBA. She's an international trainer across many disciplines, covering leadership to management, technical accounting to auditing. She's a past chief audit executive for 2 international companies and has significant experience in leadership methodologies and execution. She's also a discussion leader for several organizations, including our own AICPA and CIMA. She's authored several books and has recently launched a personal training website, which you'll find on the Thinkific platform. Lynn is here to give us the inside track on what the keys to leadership are, and she has some unique perspectives on the subject. She uses metaphors and ideas inspired by the fabulous story, The Wizard of Oz. We'll get some new insights on what makes a good leader, especially during these challenging times when people and the organizations they lead are experiencing challenges on all sorts of levels caused by the pandemic. We'll also explore the characteristics that determine a leader's chances of success or failure. We'll talk through how this applies in both personal and professional contexts. And of course, Lynn will tell us what the yellow brick road has to do with all of this. Lynn, thanks for joining us. Where are we catching up with you today? Where are you?
Thank you very much. I am in Kansas City. I live actually in a suburb of Kansas City on the Kansas side.
And where you are is quite important in terms of the Wizard of Oz story, but we'll get to that in a sec. I know I've mentioned quite a bit about you, but tell us a bit more about yourself and how your work connects with the finance and accounting profession.
Well, I grew up in southeast Kansas, a very, very small town, and that's where I got my original undergrad degree. And from there, I worked in public accounting. I've worked for 5 or 6 different companies. I've been a chief audit executive at 2 international companies. So I've had significant experience with roles that revolve around leadership and dynamics of human interactions and things like that. And in 2011, my one company that I was with the longest, 11 years, actually closed in 2008. We sold it. And I was an executive, so of course I didn't go with the sale. But I started doing a lot of my own training and consulting. Training is one of those things that is really important to me. I feel like when I was in the corporate world, that's where all my ideas, or I learned a lot of things from other people just by going to training courses. And it's not just keep up your CPE. It is literally taking advantage of and using the brainstorming techniques that you may come across when you're in these learning venues. So since 2011, and I've really engaged a lot with all these different venues you've talked about. As I said, I have recently set up my own training site, but I am on a lot of different venues with training courses that span. My background is CPA, so span, technical accounting to internal audit to governance, risk, compliance, leadership, ethics, fraud, and believe it or not, all those things tie together. So that's the quick and short.
You train people in a lot of different areas, and I know your website says quite a lot about how you do that. So take us behind the scenes a little. When you work with organizations, what are companies telling you about what's important to them right now as we head into the latter part of 2020?
Well, of course, with the pandemic, that has thrown everything into the unknown sphere. And, day to day, we learn something new, or we find out that something we thought was right a month ago is not the case. So in relationship to what companies are talking about now, it's more that they don't know, and the uncertainty that they themselves have moving further into 2020 and on into 2021. So those are the biggest questions. And a lot of organizations were in maybe prior to the pandemic arising, they were focusing on either building or expanding their business. Now they're often focusing on just how do we maintain or how do we change our business model to be able to execute, and how do we get our customers to come along with that method as well as our employees. So I think that question has probably changed just here in the last 2 or 3 months because of the pandemic.
So companies are telling you that that's important to them right now, the people and the changes. Of course, we certainly understand that. And one of the changes is probably something that any podcast listener can hear right now. They can tell that we're not in a studio. In fact, the sound of a neighbour doing the lawn, if you listen carefully, you can hear that, which reminds people that we're doing things in places that we wouldn't normally have been doing them in the past. We're working from home, we're using our home office, and sometimes the sounds of life are outside, and there's nothing wrong with that. I'm assuming it is your neighbour, isn't it, Lynn?
Yeah, it is, and that's a very good concept too. As we have moved to this online venue more, whether it be through training or just working, I've had people that we're doing training sessions and their dog jumps up on them and, or something like that. It's a different world. And, there people, if you're in your younger years and you have children and those children are home, whereas if we were in an office, you wouldn't be bringing your children or your dog. So people have to adapt, and they have to realize that, everyone is trying to do their best right now in moving forward with whatever we're going to call the new normal.
And the importance of flexibility and just accommodating when things don't go precisely as planned, because we're not masters of our own destiny. When someone in the next yard is doing their lawn, we just have to get on with what we're doing in ours. We've called this episode Follow the Yellow Brick Road to Leadership, haven't we? So what has the Wizard of Oz got to do with any of this? I did mention that you being in Kansas is quite important. I'm sure you'll fill us in on why in a second. But let's start with the basics. For those who've heard of the Wizard of Oz but don't know much about the story or its place in popular US and Western culture, just give us a quick idea of what exactly the Wizard of Oz is. Is it a film, a book, a video game?
Well, The Wizard of Oz is actually, the book came out by Frank Baum, Baum, in around 1900. And it was 1939, I believe, when it was actually made into a Technicolor movie. And that's when it really, really picked up steam. And Frank K. Baum set the Wizard of Oz story in the state of Kansas. Well, Kansas is in the middle of the United States, a lot of wheat and cornfields. And, Dorothy basically, through what we have here a lot, tornadoes, is protecting herself from a tornado. She gets hit on the head and actually transitions into this beautiful land where she's trying to find her way back home. And I like to use metaphors quite a bit, whether they be from, the Yellow Brick Road and the Wizard of Oz, or something else from, just learning in a football game or learning in a high school or something like that, to help bring things across, because I think people can relate to that more. And the Yellow Brick Road, to me, has its own personal sentiment because, yes, I live in Kansas, and I was Dorothy when I was a senior in high school in our play, The Wizard of Oz. It was the first musical my high school ever put on. No, I cannot sing very well, so I don't know how that went. But
of course, we'll put a link to the story of The Wizard of Oz, perhaps the Wikipedia page, which anyone who needs to find out more, they'll be able to follow the link in our show notes. Lynn, why do you find The Wizard of Oz such an inspiration for your blogs and your own professional perspective? Is it the characters? Is it the story? Is it the blend of the two? In fact, who are the main characters that Dorothy encounters along the Yellow Brick Road?
Well, first, I find it an inspiration. I grew up in a very small town in Kansas, and The Wizard of Oz is a very, interesting theme. But I also enjoy understanding about all the characters and how Dorothy was able to cope with everything she did when she was trying to follow the Yellow Brick Road back to home. So you have the major characters, which is Dorothy. Dorothy meets the Scarecrow, then the Tin Man, and then the Lion, and they all, through following the Yellow Brick Road, the Land of Oz, and they try to find the wizard so that the wizard can hopefully help them get back home. And just like in work, they run into their troubles along the way. There's the Wicked Witch of the West, who tries to stop Dorothy from reaching the Land of Oz because Dorothy has now gotten these magical red shoes that the Good Witch had given her on her initial landing. And in one of my blogs, I talk about you're going to have friends along the way, and you're going to meet those flying monkeys. And, that again, that's a metaphor. So those are the main characters. And of course, she meets other people along the way, but those are the main characters in the story.
Like so much in life, is a journey all about trying to look for someone who seems to have the answers or the solution. And sometimes the answers are not forthcoming. Sometimes the person who you look to for the solution or the source turns out to be a little less than you expected. So what does this story have to do with leadership?
It is, again, the way in which you interpret leadership. I think that leadership comes from a variety of factors. Yes, we talk about, can anybody be a leader? Well, I hope that is true. And I think what happens in the story is Dorothy takes learnings from the Scarecrow, the Tin Man, and the Cowardly Lion to come up with the best path for her to reach her overall goal. And so she doesn't just use her own concepts or thoughts. She realizes that teamwork and that using other individuals to help her along the way is the best path to getting to her final goal.
Okay, so let's take it from the top, quite literally, with the brain. What does the brain have to do with leadership, and how does she learn this lesson from the first character you started with? That was the Scarecrow, wasn't it?
Yep. The Scarecrow, she comes across the Scarecrow on her path down to the Yellow Brick Road, and he starts speaking to her, which she is surprised, of course, and she asks him, what would you like? And he says, well, I feel I'm a failure, and I'm a failure because I don't have a brain. And we talk about, if you want to correspond that to today's world of computers are coming to get our jobs, everybody's worried about, we may wonder ourselves if having a brain is essential to being a successful professional. Maybe that's where we fall short. People need to use their brain to logically think through issues and difficulties and face their challenges. Yes, artificial intelligence is out there, but individuals are going to have to evolve with artificial intelligence. So using your brain to adequately transition into this new world that we work in and that we live in is going to be critically important.
That reminds us, we've all got a brain, but it's not just the electronic one in your pocket or your bag. It's the one you were born with. We should remember that and use it.
That's right.
Sometimes it's quite easy to forget. We need
individuals that not only have a brain, but they recognize how to use it. Have you ever been around that coworker where you're like, what were they thinking? Were they thinking? You have to sometimes ask yourself. So we need to learn how to use our brain to its strongest capacity.
We'll find out how we can do that when we continue our conversation with Lynn, finding out what the Wizard of Oz can reveal about the keys to leadership. Lynn's just been talking about the brain, so I'd imagine the heart is next, and I bet we'll be talking about the importance of courage too. All of that is coming up in this episode of the Go Beyond Disruption podcast. It's brought to you by the Association of International Certified Professional Accountants, the AICPA and CIMA, and you can find out more about the podcast and about the rest of what we do at gobeyonddisruption.com. Lynn, before we get back onto that yellow brick road, let's take a brief detour here. You're an author and a blogger. You've been talking about that. So let's do a bit more digging into some of the stories we would find in your own body of work, perhaps in your books, in your blog articles. I know you've written something about finding the leader within.
Yes. And one of my passions is, again, do you have to be a born leader? And I certainly hope not, because if so, then our paths are defined at the day we're born. what I've noticed as I've gone through the corporate world is that people need to find their own abilities and find their own passion. And that helps them find their own leader within. Not everybody was born to be the President of the United States or the Queen or some political figure or some, well thought after sports figure. But those people that have gotten there through a lot of work and a lot of courage oftentimes, and they've used their brain and they've used their heart. So, finding the leader within is one of the blogs that I wrote out on LinkedIn, and I think I have it on my website also. But it really talks about what you need to do and sit back and think, what do you want in life? I had someone come to me that used to work for me 11 years ago, and he was thinking about taking a new position and leaving the company he had been with then for 12 years. And in the end of the day, I said, I cannot tell you what answer is right and what answer is wrong. You need to find your own passion and what is the best for you in your current circumstance as well as what you see in your future. And people often don't do that. They don't, they think, okay, I am a staff person, so that's what I'm relegated in. Find the leader within. Find ways to use that questioning and skeptical mind. Use your brain and use that courage to ask questions that you would not normally. But I think if you find the leader within, your life as a whole is going to be much more successful because you will be settled in what you do and how you do it and how you think.
That's worth remembering, that you don't have to be a born leader, but you can pick a time and a place to become one. Right, we talked about the brain. That's where everything starts, and we've already met the scarecrow. So if we head back onto the yellow brick road, if my brain serves me well, I recall the next character Dorothy meets on that yellow brick road is the Tin Man, isn't it? What does he have to teach us about the keys to leadership?
Well, Dorothy starts back on the yellow brick road with the scarecrow now because he's agreed to go to the land of Oz. Hopefully the wizard can give him a brain. And they next meet the Tin Man, all right? And the Tin Man's standing in the forest, and he's all creaky, and he can't move, and they lubricate him up. And then he says he's missing something, and Dorothy asks him what that is, and he says, because I'm empty, I have an empty chest, I'm presuming that I can only be human if I only had a heart. So he feels like his existence is very limited. A heart is a functioning organ, and in today's leadership world, professionals and leaders and managers who look to find the true road to success, especially right now during the COVID time, as a good leader, you need to have a heart. You need to understand what is impacting your people, what is impacting your business. It's not all about bottom line profits anymore. Sometimes it's about survivability. And in today's world, being able to exist, we have to have a heart for compassion. Life shouldn't be all about corporate profits. It's about caring for our world and the people in it to advance our culture in a way that our future generations will be able to pursue. So, they say there's heartless leaders out there. We've all ran into that. There was a recent study by a university that said almost 70% of workers do not respect their supervisors, and they regularly exhibit some type of stress during their workday. That is a huge statistic. And to me, that says not everybody feels their supervisor has heart. If you have a problem, you call in sick, whatever, how does your supervisor react? So having a heart, understanding the needs of your workforce, how your company can meet them, is essential in any workforce, and especially in today's world of COVID, where we're having so many different challenges to meet, not just from the professional side, but from the personal side.
What you've just pointed out is that it's all very well having a heart, and technically we all have one, but showing you have one is becoming more important. And you've mentioned the pandemic context. Do you think this is going to be a permanent change? Will we be different from now on?
I believe we will be different. I think we are seeing a lot of change as this pandemic has continued to roll out with tiny signs of recovery right now. But I think that one thing it's taught us so far is that being a leader isn't all about the supervisory skills and traits. We have to make sure we don't overlook the human side of employment, and that requires a heart. We need to treat workers in a manner that encourages a positive culture and makes them want to follow our lead. So there's leaders that can unfortunately be truly heartless, but life should, like we said, should not be all about corporate profits. It's about caring for those who you work with and showing that compassion. And, there's a study out that talks about millennials and how they are frequently changing jobs. And I think the last statistic I saw was the average millennial changes jobs every 4 years. When I came out of school, I'm a baby boomer. The trend was you find a company to work for, and lots of times you stayed there for, the majority of your career. Well, baby boomers have had to transition, but millennials have different expectations, and they are wanting that work-life balance. They're wanting to feel like their employers value what they say and what they do, and that they have a part to play and not just, quote, crunch numbers. And all of that leads to, are their leaders showing them that they have a heart and they have compassion for the human side of employment?
And talking of the humans, the next character we meet on the Yellow Brick Road isn't one. Who do we meet next in Oz?
Yeah, next we meet the Cowardly Lion. And I love the Cowardly Lion. He has grown up himself very much alone is how he's portrayed. And he feels like to get anywhere in his world, he needs a sense of courage. Now, we all think of lions as a very fierce animal. In this case, he feels he needs a sense of courage. Now, from a perspective of an individual and a leader, courage can be underestimated in today's world. But, I like to relay things to people and say, let's talk about a young millennial who is just starting his job, and he's asked to go in and interview the CFO, who maybe has been in that role for 15 or 20 years. There's just an inherent kind of difference in age and difference in knowledge there that kind of impacts that millennial's, quote, courage to be able to ask the follow-up question. Because if let's say the CFO answers the question with whatever, and maybe the millennial thinks, well, is that the whole story? Is that true? But they feel like if they ask the follow-up question that the CFO is going to think that they don't know what they're talking about. So it really takes a sense of courage in today's workforce. And we've seen that with so many of the scandals that are out there and so many of the things that have happened in corporate America. People need to have courage and come forward when things don't look right, aren't going right, talk to their supervisors, make sure procedures and processes are important. So that's very, very important in the world of today and in the future world. And in today's world, with the pandemic, again, with people spread out so remotely and working in various ways, you may have to exhibit that courage a little bit in a different way because you're not able to talk to your boss face to face. And you have to think, what's the best way to do that? Well, remember all the concepts that we are having now with private information, personal information. How do you communicate that appropriately? It probably isn't through a text. It probably isn't through an email. It can be through a phone call, a Zoom call, video conferencing, or something like that. But you also have to realize those can be recorded. So today's workforce does take courage. And I don't think we teach that well enough in our educational system. In fact, I don't really think we teach these concepts in our educational system. We teach theory. And then you go out into the world and you're like, okay, I have to execute on this theory. How am I going to do that? That is where people really run into problems, because we pursue our dreams after years of education, and we go into an organization not knowing its culture or what it's like. And so we have to follow our own yellow brick road to learn our lessons from year to year. The old saying in The Wizard of Oz, we're not in Kansas anymore, Toto. Well, the step from the world of academia to the world of corporate America is a huge one. It's one that is very difficult and very different than you've ever experienced. So just like you may have experienced in high school, there's going to be leaders and there's going to be followers, and there will be heroes and there will be bullies and there will be flying witches and there will be flying monkeys. You'll be asked to do things that you may not understand or you may question. That doesn't mean those things are wrong or right, but you're going to have to be responsible for your own actions. And there's no more falling back on old Annie M there. It's up to you now. So you have to make sure you understand and take responsibility for your own actions and ask the proper questions.
Yeah, the courage, the resilience, grit, more and more important as things get challenging in ways we could not have expected in the past. And I think you did mention that phrase, we're not in Kansas anymore. So when we, like Dorothy, click our heels together and chant, there's no place like home, there's no place like home, and we're back, we return, in our case, to the 9 to 5, what do we need to make sure we immediately do so we don't forget what we've learned from this trip down the yellow brick road?
As we move forward with what is the next corporate America going to look like when we come out, hopefully, on the other side of this pandemic, I think you can take those three concepts. Yes, Dorothy clicks her heels 3 times to get back to Kansas. But, part of that 3 times can be correlated to, the heart, the brain, and courage. And you might look back and say, okay, how did we address the issues that were occurring in the workforce at that period of time? Did we address them with enough compassion for our leaders, enough compassion for our employees? Did we address them with courage? If we saw something going wrong, did we bring it up? You have to kind of politically and correctly use your own internal attributes that you've learned about yourself and kind of mold them into a platform that you can use as your framework for your own yellow brick road to get the answers that you want.
Once we're back home, so to speak, we've returned from Oz, we must remember the lessons we've learned. That, I suppose, is the most important thing. But just going back to the story, just like the Wicked Witch in The Wizard of Oz, I did say I wouldn't say what happened in the end, but I will say that the old ways of doing things are melting away, just like the Wicked Witch. So what old practices should we be happy to actually leave behind? Because we don't want to take everything with us, do we?
No, and that's going to be a hard one, too. I think another correlation to what's in the story of The Wizard of Oz is there are good witches and there are bad witches. Well, take that to the corporate world or even high school or college. There are bullies and then there are the good people. So the truth is you can't just by looking at them always figure out who the good person is or who the bad person is. You have to be able to use your own intuition and your own knowledge as a professional to work through those processes. So the bad witch, whoever, the bully, isn't always dressed for the part. It can be very deceiving. You may believe in someone, but they may have their own agenda. So one thing I would hope would be left behind is those difficult individuals who are maybe have not changed with the times. We work in an ever-evolving workforce now where we have baby boomers, and now we have what's the newest generation, Gen Z, that's coming in. And that's just very, they all, if you look at the way they work, there's multicultural differences between, how they see things. So a young worker, a Gen Z worker, may look at the way a millennial's doing something and say, that's bad. That's not the right way. That doesn't mean it's not the right way. It might be an older way. So we have to hopefully look internally at our own companies, at our own processes, leave those bad traits behind or leave those old traits behind. I think we're going to see the art of communication changing dramatically because where we used to have, town hall meetings or groups or company, get-togethers and meetings, right now that's not going to happen. We can't get together in huge groups anymore. Heck, they won't even let us fill our football stadiums for games anymore. So we're going to transition to a world where people are working online, and that's a huge communication challenge. A lot of what I've learned and through working in the corporate world over the years is, learning people's body language and learning how to, visually see if they're accepting what you're saying or if they are trailing off in their thoughts. That doesn't always come across when you're looking at someone on Zoom. It's hard to tell that. You don't feel that intensity. So the whole art of communication is going to be something that's going to have to evolve and change. And I don't think I have the answer to that because I think we have seen a vast improvement in technology over the last 4 months. I think they say that the last 4 months of the pandemic is equivalent to like an increase in our knowledge of technology by almost 5 years. So it's really ramped up and we'll continue to ramp that up. But I just encourage companies not to fall back on the old norm. Continually look for the best processes, the improvement processes, and the things that are going to work in your organization.
So don't necessarily think that your first priority would be to go back to what you were doing before. There's no such thing as the old normal. That's for sure. So thinking about the three characters and their qualities of brain, heart, and courage, from a leader's perspective, how would you suggest that a listener can distill all of this into something that they can take with them into the demands that are coming at them tomorrow from a leadership perspective?
Well, and, one of my blogs, I wrote about the career path and the yellow brick road, and I talked about a lot of lessons that Dorothy learned along the way. And one of the final lesson, I basically said, well, I know way too much about the Wizard of Oz. That's obvious, and I admit it, but, it's because I'm from Kansas. But I think there are lessons that we all can learn from this, quote, fairy tale. Think about all the challenges that the characters and Dorothy faced and how they were able to overcome those challenges. And then notice that she just didn't overcome her own. She helped her friends realize what their challenges were and how maybe they were seeing it. And even like though the Scarecrow said he didn't have a heart, well, he didn't have a functioning heart, but he had the concept of heart. He, cared for people in other ways. And that was the Tin Man. A brain. Well, the Scarecrow didn't have a brain, but he, on the journey, was one of the individuals who was able to find new avenues for them to pursue to get down the yellow brick road. So you may see a coworker that you're like, what are they thinking? Or they don't understand this? Or do they really have a brain? Well, yes, they do. But sometimes the brain is a maturing organ. So it takes stimulating that brain and working as a team. And, that's where a lot of the courage comes in. So the final lesson I kind of take away and bring those things together is ultimately having a heart, brain, and courage. That's what leadership is all about. There may be something at the end of that rainbow. Hopefully, if you ever reach it, it may be something different than you first envisioned. But you have to understand that you have to make sure you know what concepts you can build into each of those avenues to make both your professional life and your personal life more of a success.
And make sure that once you've developed that, you then have the courage to show it.
Yeah, courage. That's a hard one, having the courage to show it. And that's what, most people will come back down to is, we know there are people out there in the workforce that may be what do they call them? Plotters. People will say, well, I have this person in my department and he's a plotter. And so he's a great worker, but he doesn't have the courage to come tell anybody if something's wrong. That's where mentoring and coaching comes in. And that's where the leader has to recognize, okay, this plotter, he's good at what he does. He has a great brain. He probably has a great heart, but he doesn't have the courage to come forward. So if the leader can recognize those things and set the pathway and the framework and the yellow brick road to help that person move and obtain the courage to be a more productive and effective individual for the company, it's going to be valuable in the long run.
I think I'm going to draw some inspiration from a quote from another Wizard of Oz film. And for those people who may not have heard of The Wiz, it was, I think, a Motown version of the Wizard of Oz story, starring Diana Ross, Michael Jackson, and some amazing music as well. I think it was made in the mid to late 70s. But there's a really good song called Ease On Down the Road, and that's the line I'm going to borrow from. So if you forgive me, Lynn, if I say, if we ease on down the road and look at the road ahead and the next disruption, while we're not expecting any flying monkeys, we're definitely expecting change. So what's one big change that lies ahead from your perspective, and how do finance professionals prepare for that change?
Oh, boy. I wish I had my crystal ball for that one. I think I could earn a lot of money. What's around the corner? Well, one of the things that the pandemic has taught us, as well as other major issues like 9/11 that occurred in the U.S., is we don't always have a crystal ball. And there's not always the exact answer. And we tend to learn from our misdoings or from something that's happened. From a business world perspective, I think my top item that I think we need to pay attention to, organizations do, is information technology and how it is going to intertwine even more with business. 15 years ago, information technology was thought as a back office function. When I went to college in the 1980s, I remember not wanting to study information technology because we sat in a very cold room with these big machines and punched COBOL cards. So those of you that are in my age group will understand that. But now, we have the cloud and all these other concepts. Information technology is going to be the way organizations are going to be able to get them through this pandemic. And then it's going to change the way we work. And it's going to change the way leaders are going to have to manage. And so as we make that evolution and walk down that path of changing and adapting information technology, leaders need to be aware of how they're going to communicate and educate and train their people to adjust to what may become the new normal. And then to adapt. And we had to adapt on the fly with this pandemic. I don't remember a time in history that I know of where we literally turned the lights of the economy off. And that happened in many countries. Everybody go home. And you're like, what do you mean? How are we going to work? But what was amazing was how quickly organizations started to adapt. And a lot of that came through information technology. And the other thing, if you notice, the word was, we're all in this together. And that's what people need to realize. From a concept of leadership and ongoing business challenges, we are all in this together. Leaders need to lead, coach, mentor, and help bring, the new generation or the new people into the new normal.
I think that's a fairly honest answer when people ask about the next big change, to say, well, we're not sure, but at least we know that because of what's been happening, we're now more adaptable and we're more resilient than we've ever been. So as leaders, as organizations, we're ready for it. That's a very positive message. Lynn, before we wrap up, let's do some signposting. For anyone who'd like to find out more about the topic and about your work, what are some resources you'd recommend and places they could go online?
I always invite people to join me on LinkedIn. If you send me a LinkedIn request, tell me you heard the podcast. And sometimes I look and say, well, who is this person? So it helps to send a note because you also have to closely monitor your network. I post regularly about business topics as well as do some blogging. You can go to my website, which is just lynnfountain.net, to learn a little bit more about me and the many training venues I'm involved with, as well as the consulting venues. I've written articles for the Institute of Internal Auditors magazine. In fact, one of my articles was given an honorable mention by one of their awards this past January. And I also do a lot of work with other training venues, so you'll see my trainings online. So I think if you just type my name into the Google search engine, you'll find various connections. But I also always encourage people, take a look at my website. And, I did put a newsletter out not too long ago and just literally link to the blogs, because a lot of my blogs you will see are not necessarily about how technically to do XYZ. It's about things that have happened in life, how we've gotten through them, or how we've processed them, or how they have impacted me as a person or other people around me. And you can just Google my name. You'll see a lot of different ways you can look at the offerings I have out there.
And that is Lynn as Lynn.
Yes.
So don't forget that second N, lynnfountain.net. We'll put all the links in our show notes and we'll link to your LinkedIn profile as well. Lynn, we ask all our guests to imagine their own Go Beyond Disruption t-shirt. And if you were to print one sentence on the front, a sentence that delivers a simple message for a leader to take away from our conversation today, what would that t-shirt say?
Ooh, that's a good question. I'm going to go back to saying, find the leader within. I think if you find your own passion, understand your own skills, find how you can be a leader in certain situations, you're going to be able to help move your circle of influence past the disruption that we are experiencing today.
It's going to be a popular t-shirt. Find the leader within. Thank you, Lynn. That's it for this episode. For further information, we'll put all those links in our show notes. And if you're listening to this via your podcast app, you can view those podcast notes really easily. Just click on this episode's info icon in the app, and that's on your smartphone, your tablet. Or if you're using your computer's web browser, you can just open the episode in the browser and view the notes as well. You'll find everything right there. Also, visit gobeyonddisruption.com for more. That's gobeyonddisruption.com. Thank you so much for listening. From our AICPA and CIMA office in London, I'm Kyle Hannan. We'll be back soon with more conversations that help you and your profession to go beyond disruption. Till next time, keep listening and keep safe. Goodbye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Beyond Disruption, brought to you by the Association of International Certified Professional Accountants. Learn more about today's topic at AICPA-CIMA.com/disruption. This podcast is designed to provide illustrative information with respect to the subject matter covered and does not represent an official opinion or position of the Association of International Certified Professional Accountants or any of its subsidiaries or affiliates. It is provided with the understanding that the association, its affiliates, and subsidiaries are not engaged in rendering legal, accounting, or other professional services. If such advice or expert assistance is required, the services of a competent professional person should be sought. The association, its subsidiaries, and affiliates make no representations, warranties, or guarantees as to and assume no responsibility for the content or application of the material contained herein and expressly disclaim all liability for such damages arising out of the use of, reference to, or reliance on such material.